I want to put you where I am now. As a 31-year-old, where were you at 31 years old when you kind of your brain was fully formed? You were making decisions for yourself. You got a little bit of life experience under your belt. Um, during that time, I would say not your formative years, but kind of when you got things clicking, where were you like spiritually?
Okay. Um, can I provide a quick background of what I was doing in my 20s
Absolutely.
that led me to being 31?
Indeed.
It's relevant in the flow.
Fair.
So it's great to see you, Joe. You're a lot older than I am, so you represent the older generation, and I represent the younger generation, right?
All right. Yeah.
No, realistically, when I was 31, it was 1990. Tells you how old I am. And I had spent 8 years after college living in, I graduated college in 1980, moved to Washington, D.C., and lived there from 1980 to 88, having been from suburban New York, where I'm from originally. And in 1988, I moved back to New York on what was supposed to be a temporary basis. I was going back to Washington, but I moved back because I was experiencing depression, emotional, psychological depression. And I had my family in New York, mother, father, who were like, even though they were divorced, they were parents still. And they were kind of like willing to help me and take care of me, even though I was 31 years old. So I went up there for sort of be the recipient of caretaking or caregiving, I should say, and to help deal with the situation. And I thought I was going back to Washington. Anyway, getting to the spirituality point. In 1990, I ended up joining a 12-step program called Emotions Anonymous. And as opposed to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, it was for people with emotional issues that were not strict addictions from the point of view of you don't imbibe the if you're a lot of people were in there for anxiety. I was in there for depression. It's a little different, but it's not something that you can just stop doing. With alcohol, you can stop taking alcohol. With depression, you can only work on it sort of like one day at a time. But as you may or may not know about 12-step programs, it is a spiritual higher power kind of program. The 11th step, and this I have to remember, going back some years, had to do with like meditation and being quiet and developing a closer relationship with your higher power as you define it. And of course, you don't get to the 11th step until you go through 10 previous steps. And one of them probably was the first step, had to do with sort of turning my life over to my higher power as I understand him or her or it to be. All of which is a way of saying that really was my significant introduction to spirituality, because I needed a higher power. I was depressed. I was not managing my emotional state well enough independently. And I believed in a higher power. Although I remember that I had a sponsor. I remember saying to him, well, I don't really know what a higher power is because I never had one before. And he said, anything greater than you that you believe in, that gives you a sense of meaning. And he said to me, what could that be? And I said, well, I like baseball. He said, well, then baseball can be your higher power. Now, looking back, on that 33 years later, it seems it seems kind of silly. But at the time, I was like nature, baseball, whatever. I don't care.
Right.
I want to be in the 12-step program and do these, the steps about making amends to people you've hurt. And the steps have a lot of richness and merit in as you go through them. And I just wanted to establish myself in the program. There's, some community there, people to become friends with. So that was my real personal introduction to spirituality. And it happened to start occurring when I was 31 years old. So there's a real coincidental facet to that.
Indeed. I think it worked out that you didn't stick with baseball as your higher power. You wouldn't be able to testify without the express written consent of Major League Baseball, which I imagine is hard to get. But with that being said, so that's your introduction. That's your leading point. Before that point, what like the people around you, if you had any believers around you, if you were aware of what some other people what they were naming their source, what they were following? What did that look like?
What do you mean before I was 31 years old, or I'm not quite
Yeah,
clear?
like where did you have any like knowledge, introduction, or involvement with like any organized religions before that point? Even like maybe if it was from a periphery from family members.
Yeah, so I mean, we went to a Jewish temple on the high holy days, which are one Rosh Hashanah and two Yom Kippur. Those are the two high holy days.
Mhm.
And it was torture because you had to get dressed up, go sit in this fucking temple, pardon the expression, and listen to these idiot adults talk about in a foreign language, partially, about
Mhm.
stuff that was the most boring, tedious stuff ever. And then one time I was sitting with my grandmother and I said, I'm really bored. And she said, let's count all the squares on the ceiling. It was a huge ceiling. There's like 500 people in this room.
Yeah.
And there was probably thousands of squares on the ceiling. But she sort of made up this game for me to give me something to do. Now, again, I'm not sure I'm answering your question very well.
No, that's exactly what I was looking for. Just um, because what stood out to me was um, I've never encountered somebody who their first foray, sorry, their first foray into something. It seems like although you were tangentially in the synagogue. I'm sorry if that's not the right term.
No, it
That's
is.
not what you initially labeled your higher power, or you know what I mean. Maybe it's because before you kind of understood fully, but I do think that's interesting because a lot of times we're handed down, you know, whatever our parents' religion is or whatever their beliefs before we can understand why we're handed down, and that's what we assign, and whether or not we feel a connection with that, that's what is presented to us. So thank you for that.
Just one
But
quick addendum. I
yeah,
can't help. Later on, as I was growing up, my parents and my grandmother, they all said to me the same thing. They didn't believe any of that nonsense in temple either. It
okay,
was all
yeah,
just like you had to show up and go. So
more ritual than yeah.
totally, or just show appearances. So I was, in a way, I was kind of relieved. Like they didn't believe any of that stuff either.
No
So it
pressure, no
brought
pressure.
them down to earth. Brought the whole thing down to my level.
Indeed, indeed. I can dig it. I can dig it.
Can I hop in, ask Ken, do you have a question for Joe along these lines? I think you did.
Yeah. Well, you seem to have come, pretty far along at the age of 31. So, I mean, I just wanted you to sort of take me through whatever aspect of your childhood, youth, or young adulthood that got you interested in these types of matters, spiritual matters, and helped you to get to where you are today.
Indeed. So I was born into a Christian family, like both sides, parent generation before was just, and not I won't just say a Christian family, a Christian community, because it's my parents and my grandparents, like we were connected to different types of churches and the members, and some were neighbors, some you were on the sports teams with and all that good stuff. But that's how I started. Because my family was serious about it and involved about it, like I got involved in the early, and like I was a believer. I'll still say I am a believer. It may look different if you try to quantify it or like put words around it. It may not be exactly what everything I was taught growing up, but to the same extent, principles, tenets, all that good stuff, I still am a believer. So growing up and getting into scripture and participating, that was about up until I think about maybe around high school times. I just had a curiosity for for a few things that I didn't feel like was being answered in the hundreds, if not more, thousands of church services I've been to. It was just some things that weren't answered. Sometimes the attitude towards questions or any speculation was just believe. And as a young and inquisitive mind, sometimes that's not enough to keep you satisfied, and so you go looking for answers. And on my quest for answers, the question I was asking myself, and even the spirit, I would say I was asking the spirit, is what were and I guess this is real specific to my experience, because as a African American, African in America, whatever you want to call it. Um, I asked myself, what does spirituality look like in Africa, early times before, you know what I mean? Because we typically, and even like in my Christian uphold, they go back in history, they go back in, you know, King James and all that stuff. But before them, what was being done? So I kind of went on a quest over my favorite lane, YouTube University. But and eventually I built on more and looked for like better sources, but just seeing what you know, ancient civilizations, what their spiritual practices were, what they believed in, um, that type of thing. And it just kind of opened my mind to continue asking questions. Started learning about yoga, tangentially knowing about, you know, Islam through having friends and others that were close to me in that community. Same with like Judaism and a couple other religions. But that's how I kind of came about. Just started off, you know, in a strong Christian household, and then look to supplement that with questions about what others are doing.
Okay, so I'm going to try following up on that. So what have been the most important, like, for example, have you been interested in Buddhism, Taoism, or what? It doesn't matter, but what have sources or what elements have you found meaningful, or in yogic traditions have you found meaningful above and beyond Christianity, perhaps, if that's the case?
So I will say Taoism. I read Tao Te Ching when I moved away from home, and I read it, but like I didn't read it like a book. I read it like scripture because that's after a while I kind of got that's what the feel was, and at that time in my life it really stood out to me because like I said before, coming from you know, Christian values and what's being taught in the church, I'm looking at another type of spiritual text that is relaying the same themes, but they're doing it in, you know, different words, you know, different metaphors, that type of thing, but it's connecting the same way. And it's kind of saying, you know, some of the same things about humility and, you know, what it takes to, you know, truly be like, um, you know, and I'll, for an example, in Christianity, you know, they say, I am gonna mess it up, so I'm not even gonna try. But basically, he who humbles himself will be exalted. He who exalts himself will be humble. And I feel like when I was reading that Tao Te Ching, I was getting a heavy influence of, you know, being not looking to be ascended by your people, but being ascended because you chose to, you know, have compassion and take the humble route in all of your interactions and things like that, and not fighting against, not trying to impose your way on anybody or anything, but by going through the flow, just naturally being put in certain positions. So that was one thing that really stood out to me. Um, the rest is to be continued. I can't say that's Taoism was the one that I dived in directly by reading that scripture. I haven't picked any others to this date to dive in and really study it to that same depth, but that was one of the highlights.
Okay, so where would you say you're at now in your spiritual pursuits?
And at this moment, it's hard to say. It's hard to say because although I still look to, you know, study or, you know, learn more about different, you know, whether it's different sects of spirituality or different forms, um, I've really been trying to understand that, applying it all, right? So, you know, instead of going and diving into whether it's Islam or Confucianism, is taking the knowledge and what I've had so far and applying it consistently. Whether that's in the form of like a daily practice, mindset shift, like mantras and whatnot. I'm gonna be honest with you, I haven't been doing an amazing job of being consistent about, hey, this is what I'm, you know, making it a daily practice. And I'll say that because um, there's these times in our lives where the other stuff becomes more important. So some of the habits and some other things may fall by the wayside. But I say where I am is applying what I've learned, spiritually, these spiritual tenets, the way I want to like walk in, what I believe in, how I want to treat people, as trying to apply it in real time and kind of seeing the fruit that is bared by living with living with this type of heart, living, by certain, morals and whatnot. I did want to ask you a question. Sorry to cut you off. But while you were, doing your introduction and while you were part of the 12-step program that you were involved in, like, did you have any type of like scripture or anything written that you were following or that kind of made things connect for you?
Yes. Well, first, it's not scripture, but EA, which is Emotions Anonymous, had a black book, a 12-step book, just like Alcoholics Anonymous. AA has a big book. I don't know what they call it, big book.
Yeah.
EA has a book, which is, I do consider it a spiritual text for sure. But then around 1993, I became introduced to A Course in Miracles, which is not related to 12 steps, a separate thing. You may know about it already. I think Ian knows a little about it. And I started going on Tuesday nights to a woman's house for weekly Course in Miracles, reading from the big, now that's a big book. It's like 1,400, over 1,000 pages. So that's like a big spiritual book. And we would read from it. We're going, passing it around in a group on Tuesday nights. And that became my spiritual, biblical, in lieu of Bible, my spiritual book.
Indeed. That being said, that's your book. Was there any outside pressure from, I don't want to say pressure, but were there any outside influences, or were you were part of any groups or circles where people had different beliefs and where there was a sharing of ideas, or even, maybe what's the word I'm looking for? Just a little debate about methods and ideas. Was that part of your experience when you were kind of growing in it early on?
I don't recall really being involved in any kind of spiritual discussion group situations where people were sort of conflicting or comparing or contrasting differing views. I mean, most of my interaction with people and socially and work is just non-spiritual in nature. It's just going to work and having a job, or going to the tennis court and playing tennis. Most of my friends, especially in those days, were really secular types. So I grew up in a conventional, non-spiritual world and carried that with me. So the spiritual thing that I did with the 12-step and the Course in Miracles has been my own little niche, and I connect with people inside that bubble or that community, but I haven't done the comparing, contrasting with other people and other viewpoints that I think you're referring to.
Understood. Yeah. It's interesting. The reason I ask is because growing up with my background and having the privilege of being around different communities and different people, sometimes you have those debates, even within the same not denomination, but under Christianity. I had friends that were Baptists or Church of God, and they would talk about nuances and differences and whatnot. And to me at that time, I was like, if we talking about the same God, nuances and differences are just that, and it's up to interpretation to some. But to me, I didn't see the point in the division of it. I was often confused by, like I said, right? I grew up and was at least tangentially a part of 2 or 3 different churches. And at some point it clicked, like, if we all believe in the same God, why aren't we all going to the same service at the same place? Now, as I matured, I realized that the logistics of that would kind of be hard, getting that many people in one building at the same time and all that good stuff. But also on top of like the differences in the denominations and how people decided to worship, I kind of saw that that's what it was at the time.
Now, what I was going to ask you before is, so like where you're at now, let's say you were having a hard time or you wanted to pray or meditate to help, you think through a difficult situation. Would you identify yourself as still a practicing Christian and use those tenets to, take you through that? Or are you more of a hybrid collection of differing spiritual traditions that you would follow at this time?
I would probably have to say the latter, because there are times where like I go to pray and like, I'm praying to God, right? And there's times where I might bless a meal with the family and it's in Jesus' name. But it's times where, I get within myself in those quiet moments, and I've at times I've come to like not label whatever, the force is, because I don't even want that to be a distraction, right? To me, the energy is what I'm looking to connect with, the energy inside of me that connects with the overall spirit. That's what I'm looking to connect with. Um, there's times I don't try to give it a name. There's times that I know I'm just trying to talk to myself on a deeper level. You know what I mean? Talk to my spirit. There's times I'm praying like deep down in my soul that I get past something. So I would say it's a combination. Um, and there will be times where I feel like I need to pray, and what I end up doing is stretching, right? Doing some yoga poses and maybe internally saying something. So I kind of been just getting by how what feels right at the moment, you know what I mean? And trying to use those things, to comfort me and get me through.
And I'm trying to throw out another question if I can. Not sure where you live. You live in Philadelphia, or?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay. In your peer group and social community and so on, are you, connecting mostly with people with your kinds of interests and views? Or do you know a lot of people who are just not spiritual at all? Is that something you flow easily with your peer group and friends? Or is it more like your own thing that you share with a few select people?
So it's, if I think about it, my close friends, they believe in a higher power of some sort, right? It may be different, it may be attached to like a major religion, it may be, something else. So they have a higher power. I have some that are coming into it, like walking into it and being able to, you know, they're feeling these things for the first time. They have that aptitude to connect with the spirit, that appetite, I should say. And then I have some that, we never talk about it. It's never a thing. So I think it's a combination. But what I think I've come to respect about all the people have that I just mentioned is that with all of them, I'm able to have like conversations. We're able to have conversations about things that are bigger than us. And even if it's not believing in something that's bigger than us, then like doing something for a cause that's bigger than us. And I feel like, and in some people's lives, that's their higher power. There, like you said, like Major League it may not be baseball, but like it's a cause. Their higher power may be like, you know, doing something altruistic for those in need and trafficking in that. I don't want to say trafficking, but participating in that type of giving and whatnot.
Okay.
Do you have another question? I'll pop back in.
Do you have any more for us to?
I wanted to ask if you Because I think that was a great question you asked in terms of, you know, today, like, you know, whether it's I put my head down to prayer, if I'm looking for hope or whatnot, how do I, what's, do you have like a routine, I would say, you know, even if it's not a label or practice, do you have a routine or something that makes you feel closer, more connected?
Yeah. Well, right now, the Course in Miracles is my primary thing. And there's a workbook in the Course, it gets a little technical, but there's a workbook in the Course in Miracles volume. There's 3 volumes. Second volume is a workbook, and it has lessons, 365 lessons. So, and when you complete the 365 lessons, you go right back to lesson 1 and you do them all 365 of them over again. And it's sort of like endless. So it's not like you complete the lessons and you're done. So recently I completed the 365 lessons. It was a few weeks ago. And then I started back on lesson 1. And right now I'm on lesson 19. And the idea of the lesson is, like, generally speaking, you read it in the morning. You usually do some kind of short meditation. And there are some of the lessons have other little sort of things that to do that I won't get into the details because it won't really make sense. But the answer to your question is, I have my daily lesson of that from the 365. I still go to the Tuesday night group that I mentioned going to in 1993. Still going there in 2023, although there was a break in the middle. There's also a group that I sometimes go to on Wednesday mornings, and there's online stuff. So the Course in Miracles can, like, you can do there's podcasts, there's everything. You can do it's like a la carte. You can do as much of it as you want. And I do some Buddhist study as well, but that's separate. And
what piqued your interest in Buddhism specifically?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I mean, I think I was started to be interested in Buddhism 20 to 30 years ago. I think most of it really stems down to my personal emotional challenges, not having peace of mind, being anxious, being depressed, having trouble fitting into the world, having trouble making my career work, having trouble making my relationships work. So I was like, anything, I was just like, anything you can help me.
Right. I hear that. By any means.
Yeah, by any means necessary. So I do some Buddhist study on the side, so to speak, in addition to the aforementioned Course in Miracles. And I'm still open to anything. You can call it, anything you want. If it's helpful, I'm interested in it, in the confines of however much time somebody has to put into these things. So I feel like I have a daily practice, and I'm grounded with that now. I feel like I have a good thing.
Ian, you wanted to pop in, I'll let it breathe for a minute.
Yeah, I think that was a wonderful discussion, guys. I really appreciate, learning more about you guys' lives and how you've walked on this journey. Joe, I appreciate you, man. Just like getting better and better expressing yourself, and I love every time you talk. And the hand clap from Ken. Super appreciative for you.
I'm glad we decided to do it how we did, because, and I think it's important what we did. Like I said, we could have the overarching conversation about what was going on at the time, but I feel like at a certain point it gets too distant to be relatable, and I'm glad we got to connect it to what we were going through at the time where we were going through it.
Well,
Yeah,
well done.
too.
Well done, Joe. Well done, Ian.
Thank you, Ken. Ian, appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank y'all.
Keep in touch if I can be of any reason. If you want to keep in touch, we should keep in touch.
Ken, we'll do, for sure. We'll do.
I still owe you a phone call, Ken, and hopefully I'll see both of y'all on Thursday.
Yeah, I thought we were off this week, but we could talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Or maybe I'm off.
I think
I'm off this week. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll holler at y'all. I appreciate y'all.
Okay.
Indeed, gentlemen.
And
good to see
anybody
y'all.
still watching, appreciate it. Come join, have these conversations that are outside the normal scope of, I guess, human dialogue, and enrich yourself with us. Peace, love. Thank y'all.